Hello, I'm Mick Adam Noya, and this is Channel Crossing, the program that brings you television from all over the world and shows you where to find it. Well, forget about television, because the circus is in town.
So Big Ben has struck 10 o'clock, and we can now start trying to discover which side thinks has carried the day.
The total number of votes cast in favour of leave was 82,000.
There are people in this town who have not voted, in this city, not voted since 1983, not voted, in other words, since the days of Margaret Thatcher, who came out, as they put it, and this was people on both sides, to kick the establishment.
So these are the regions: southwest, you can see southeast, northwest, Yorkshire and the Humber, northeast, West Midlands, east of England, East Midlands and Wales, all going for leave. Now, if that isn't a portrait of a divided country on this one issue, I don't know what is.
I think this referendum has unleashed all sorts of stuff. It's why I always thought it was a bad idea to have it. And that sounds arrogant. Don't let the people decide.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, don't...
But more than sound arrogant.
There really doesn't get a bigger question than this, which is who governs you?
Let's face it, we end this referendum with the country more divided than it was at the start of the referendum.
I mean, if the Prime Minister loses this, then I don't see how he can survive as Prime Minister. I mean, I to speak from personal experience, if you stake your career on a referendum and the people vote against you, then it's time to get, I mean, talk about lame ducks. I mean, this would be a duck with no legs and no stability whatsoever.
There is no need for a precise timetable today, but in my view, we should aim to have a new Prime Minister in place by the start of the Conservative Party conference in October.
I hope this victory brings down this failed project and leads us to a Europe of sovereign nation states trading together, being friends together, cooperating together, and let's get rid of the flag, the anthem, Brussels, and all that has gone wrong.
I fought this campaign in the only way I know how, which is to say directly and passionately what I think and feel, head, heart and soul. I held nothing back. I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the European Union. And I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself.
Figures on our now sunlit House of Commons. The Leave campaign on 16,835, and that's winning post was 16,776,000. So they've just reached that point and they remain just not quite there, and still a little grey bit to be filled in, but Leave in blue have already crossed the line.
I don't think it is the end of the story, and we will change it. How? Because, well, I mean, why don't we have another referendum? If we've had one, why don't we have another one?
You're here with
but we can't have one until we've really got together and looked each other in the eyes. People in the north, people in the southwest, we've all looked at each other in the eyes and gone, do we really want this?
I think a lot of young people will be thinking today, wow, you know, this is the grey hairs have taken over the asylum, you know, what's in it for me? So I'm hoping that will galvanise them and they'll take more interest in politics and they'll start to try and make their voice heard, because at the moment they're the people whose voice hasn't been heeded, our younger generation. It seems to me, looking at the figures, it's a split around the age of 50. So although I'm in the one camp on that side, I'm hoping, particularly here, a place like Glastonbury, that we have the opportunity to you know, wake people up to the what's happened and what we can do about bringing our country back to a place where we feel comfortable with one another.
Why is that the fault of Europe?
The minute this referendum's over, and if Remain win, that's it. Our NHS is gone. I put these out, and I'm hoping I'm not going to look stupid. I'm really, fingers crossed, hoping I'm not going to look stupid.
The BBC are calling it for leave.
Really?
Yeah.
Seriously?
You need to put the telly on. Tanya, just tell me what's your reaction to that?
I'm over the moon. I don't know what to say. We did it. Everybody woke up in time. Everybody listened. everybody understands. Yes, it's going to be rough at the beginning, but we've done it.
I recognise those towns. That's where I'm from, Evan. And I think these people are going to be really upset when they find out that they've been lied to. I think it's misguided. Obviously, the people have voted with good intentions, but I think we are being led down a very dark path.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
Hang on a moment, that was one of your adverts.
Well, it wasn't one of my adverts, I can assure you.
Well, that was one of the Leave campaign's adverts, that money was going to go to the NHS.
And I think they made a mistake.
That's why many people have voted.
They made a mistake in doing that. But what I can tell you is we have a nice
You're saying
featherbed.
after 17 million people have voted for Leave,
Yep.
based, I don't know how many people voted on the basis of that advert, but that was a huge part of the propaganda. You're now saying that's a mistake?
We have a £10 billion a year, a £34 million a day featherbed. That is going to be free money that we can spend on the NHS, on schools, or whatever it is.
But you're not guaranteeing that that money, as promised, will go to the NHS?
You must understand, I was ostracised by the official Leave campaign and as I've always done, did my own thing.
Do you think there are other things that people will wake up this morning and find out aren't going to happen as a result of voting this way?
Well, I tell you what they will find out, that we're back to being a normal country, in charge of our own laws, and able to start making our own relationships with the rest of the world, maybe even re-engaging with the Commonwealth.
That, of course, is Britain's sexiest man alive, Nigel Farage. For those of you outside the UK who may not be familiar, he is the leader of UKIP, the UK Independence Party, which is sort of like the Tea Party in the US. Nigel Farage is also, to put it simplistically, one of the architects of the scenario that we now find ourselves in. And therein lies his genius. Sure, he may be completely repugnant and occasionally says rude things, like when he said that Britain should deny foreigners HIV medicines.
You can come into Britain from anywhere in the world and get diagnosed with HIV and get the retroviral drugs that cost up to £25,000 per year per patient. I know there are some horrible things happening in many parts of the world, but what we need to do is to put the National Health Service there for British people and families who in many cases have paid into this system for decades.
Thank you. Leanne Wood. This kind of scaremongering rhetoric is dangerous.
It's a fact.
It's dangerous, it divides communities and it creates stigma to people who are ill, and I think you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Well, I'm sorry, we've got to put our own people first.
But despite any of that, he is the leader of a party that only has one MP in the House of Commons. He couldn't win a seat himself, and yet he is the most influential politician in Britain. I mean, it's certainly not this guy.
I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
Or even this guy.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
You guessed it, the referendum was actually a well-calculated publicity stunt put together by Fox to promote the new Independence Day film. But kidding aside, if ever a man can congratulate himself on undue national and international influence from a position of relative electoral obscurity, it's Nigel Farage. Does that remind you of anyone?
They want to take their borders back, they want to take their monetary back, they want to take a lot of things back. They want to be able to have a country again. So I think you're going to have this happen more and more. I really believe that, and I think it's happening in the United States. It's happening by the fact that I've done so well in the polls. You look at the recent polling and you look at the swing states and you see how I'm doing, and I haven't even started my campaign yet, essentially.
The irony, of course, is that in his case, the reverse is true. Trump has no influence, but apparently is highly electable? Maybe not. Now, politics can be fascinating, but we're here to talk about television. So how does Brexit affect the film and television industry? The one thing that most can agree on right now is that no one really knows the outcome, except that it will have massive ramifications. For example, a lot of new shows that you are seeing right now from the likes of the BBC, HBO, Sky Atlantic, Channel 4, Netflix, and Amazon are made with the cooperation between production companies in different countries. Game of Thrones, for example, is filmed in Northern Ireland and other parts of Europe, and partly supported by the European Regional Development Fund. The Sky Atlantic drama, The Last Panthers, that Channel+Crossing reviewed and made our list of one of the best shows of 2015, was produced by British and French companies. Together, they were able to receive over €1 million in funding from the EU. An EU media program under the umbrella Creative Europe has co-funded many British television and film projects, including Hinterland, Shaun the Sheep, Room on the Broom, the BBC Two documentary Inside Obama's White House, Carol, Mr. Turner, and the Amy Winehouse documentary Amy. People like Michael Ryan, who is the chairman of the Independent Film and Television Alliance, said that the Brexit vote is likely to be devastating. Similar bigwigs have made similar statements, including one of the biggest of them all, Harvey Weinstein. The consensus seems to be that the relationship between producers, financiers, and distributors is in jeopardy. This gentleman here, who looks like a cast member of The Thick of It, is former Culture Minister Ed Vaizey. He said with specific regard to the creative industries that leaving the EU would be an utter disaster. By the way, this also contradicts his boss, who is one of the leading advocates for vote leave. That would be former Culture Secretary John Whittingdale. He's the charming man that has been trying to dismantle the BBC piece by piece. On the plus side, Whittingdale is now out. Nigel Farage is still a horrible person, but he has stepped down as leader of UKIP so he can go back to playing golf and sipping pints. He's also grown a mustache that makes him look more like a pedophile. And just as Alex Salmon predicted, David Cameron is gone, along with almost his entire cabinet. The new Prime Minister is Theresa May. While her long-term political goals are unclear, she has said she wishes to start the withdrawal from Europe by the beginning of 2017, a decision already met with legal challenge. So in the face of an uncertain political and economic future, and those wanting to take back their leave votes over false promises and other things, the British people and the rest of us may find that the future of our entertainment may see some dark days.
You got me, Clive.
Always do, Lacey. Always do.
What the hell? Clive, I said...
Lacey? Shit. It was the time of the preacher.
Preacher is high-octane insanity. No more, no less. It's also AMC's latest comic book to television show. The story is essentially as follows. A supernatural force travels through space until it finally arrives on Earth. From there, it seems to search for a host body to share, but every time it tries to inhabit someone,
I'm the chosen one.
They explode. That is until it finds Jesse Custer, a former bad man trying to be a good man by taking up his deceased father's job as a preacher in the small Texas town of Annville. This mysterious force sees Jesse as the perfect host and gives him seemingly divine power, a power that can force anyone to do anything they are told. Around him are a cast of colorful characters. The most normal one is Emily, the church bookkeeper and organist that also multitasks as a single mother and waitress. She is the most positive person in Jesse's life and reluctantly sees the good in him. On the other end of that is Tulip. Tulip O'Hare is the stereotype of the crazy, lawless ex-girlfriend who after an extended amount of time tries to recast herself as Bonnie to Jesse's Clyde. She also wants him to help her exact revenge on someone from their collective past. Then we have Cassidy, a vampire from Northern Ireland, who enjoys hard drugs, alcohol, and prostitutes. He takes an instant liking to Jesse and decides to become his best friend. In addition to them, there are two angels on a mission, the mysterious gunslinger, the town bully, the town bigwig, the town sheriff, and his son Eugene, who is known primarily by his nickname, Assface. Let's put that aside for now. The comic book was created by Irish writer Garth Ennis and British artist Steve Dillon, which on a funny side note is also the nationalities of the four main cast members. It was published by DC imprint Vertigo and ran for 66 issues, 5 special issues, and a 4-issue miniseries. It was a great success, and it's still one of Vertigo's most popular titles. The road to adapt Preacher was long and complicated, starting back in 1998. In 2001, it was finally greenlit as a film with James Marsden to star as Jesse Custer. But financial troubles occurred and the film's modest budget evaporated. In 2006, the rights changed hands and went to HBO, who commissioned a script and a first-season story bible with Mark Steven Johnson to produce and Howard Deutsch to direct. Johnson's intention was to create a shot-for-shot adaptation, with each issue being an episode. Unfortunately, in 2008, there was a regime change at HBO and the whole project was dropped. It has been claimed that it was turned down for being too dark and too violent, but I find that hard to believe for obvious reasons. In any case, the rights moved on again, this time to Columbia Pictures, with Sam Mendes attached to direct. Time passed. Sam Mendes went on to direct some stage plays in the West End and a couple of Bond films, and once again, Preacher sat in limbo. Then in 2013, AMC announced a pilot. The following year, they announced a series. 2 years later, the show finally aired in May 2016. Preacher was developed by Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen. Yes, that's Seth Rogen. And also developed by Sam Catlin. This brings us to one of the show's strengths, the writing. Catlin was a producer and writer on Breaking Bad and is considered to have written some of the show's best episodes. As showrunner of Preacher, he brings some of Breaking Bad's nuanced sensibilities at a slow and steady pace. The comic book is a manic, over-the-top satire that at most times can be unrelenting. The writers of the television series do a good job of managing the story's content, so there's just enough insanity for conventional audiences. The result is something that is highly entertaining instead of being incomprehensibly drudgerous. Another strength of the show is its cast. On the surface, it may look like Dominic Cooper is doing all of the acting with his good looks and better hair, but in truth his performance is nuanced. He is able to project the character's internal struggle, as well as inhabit Jesse's various emotional states, and his seemingly bipolar nature. Joseph Gilgan's Irish vampire Jesse is easy to like, and probably the show's greatest source of adrenaline. Yes, Jesse is a bit of a walking stereotype, but Gilgan is a very good actor, and his experience with passagey roles allows him to add substance to a character that could easily be one-dimensional. W. Earl Brown has a relatively small role as Sheriff Root, but he brings the same kind of unpredictable intensity that he did in his role in Deadwood. Ian Coletti plays the sheriff's son Eugene. Eugene survived a suicide attempt with a shotgun and now looks like this. The details of that incident unfold throughout the course of the show, but what is immediately clear is that he is mocked and despised by the entire town. Eugene, or Assface, is the personification of the show itself. He's a character that is immediately graphic and hard to look at, but as a whole is very layered and never completely what he seems. Ian Coletti does a good job, but it's hard to see past the makeup. Jackie Earle Haley is one of the show's brightest spots, and one of its most demented. Odin Quincannon is the owner of Quincannon Meat and Power. He's also Season 1's primary villain, and villain he very much is. It should be noted that in the comic book, Quincannon doesn't show up until near the end. By placing him at our beginning, There is an added drama and tension, making it a wise choice. Anatole Yusuf and Tom Brooke played de Blanc and Fior, two angels who are on a mission to capture the power that resides inside Jesse. Yusuf and Brooke have a natural chemistry that sells the relationship, and the characters are clearly captivating. Unfortunately, they're not as fleshed out as I would like. While we're on the subject, it should be said that Preacher is not without its flaws. So far, Tulip is utterly defined by her obsession with Jesse Custer, so much so that it greatly hampers the performance from Ruth Negga. To her credit, she tries, and Negga certainly is an intriguing choice, but she has to play against a character who presents herself as tough and independent, while at the same time revolving most of her actions around Jesse and has pouty temper tantrums when she doesn't get what she wants. Lucy Griffiths adds interesting qualities and realism to a character that's fairly dull. Emily is dull, and in some ways, that is seemingly the point of her character. But luckily the actress playing her is not, and she makes it work as best as she can. Small trivia. Lucy Griffiths starred in another DC property, the pilot episode of Constantine, the show, not the film. Unfortunately, that particular endeavor was short-lived. She also appeared as a vampire in the HBO show True Blood. Some fans of the comic book might argue that AMC's new series is playing it too safe and moving at a glacial pace. But Preacher is rock and roll, not heavy metal. By choosing to make the first season a kind of prequel to the comic book, we as a television audience are given a chance to know and absorb the main characters on this world before the crazy roller coaster to come. Showrunners Caitlin Goldberg and Rogan have given us a nuanced Southern Gothic tale, rather than simply a hyperbolic comic book adaptation. The story pacing isn't always perfect, and sometimes the characters meander repetitiously. But when things work, they work well. While the majority of the first season is spent on getting to know Jesse in the small town he grew up in, the comic book is in fact a road trip, one that the television series will follow for its second season. I have no idea if the second season will be any good, but it most certainly will be entertaining.
I got you in. I got Malibu, who's dead, to play the record, which in fact is the last record that he'll ever play. While motherfuckers shooting from both sides, while your stupid ass is trying to get the record off of Malibu's turntables, all for a bitch who thinks she's better than you.
Don't call her a bitch.
A motherfucking bitch!
Don't call her a bitch!
Sit your ass down. I don't understand all the crying and moaning over a female.
You don't know.
I don't know. About what? You're not about to say love, are you?
What if I did say love?
Then I say you're fucking right. I don't understand anything about love. Who is this dude, man?
1, 2, 3, 4.
No one ever accused Baz Luhrmann of being subtle. His first 3 films were Strictly Ballroom, Romeo and Juliet, and Moulin Rouge, in that order, both written and directed. His last film was The Great Gatsby. In between that and his first films, there are a couple of elaborate ads for Chanel No. 5, some shorts, and a film which bears the name of Baz Country of Origin. Indeed, a more appropriate word would be grandiose, and The Get Down comfortably follows that continuity. But before I dive into details, it's important to make the inevitable comparison to another music-related show. The second month into 2016, HBO released Vinyl. It had a $100 million budget with a $30 million pilot directed by Martin Scorsese and produced by Mick Jagger. The reviews for the pilot were mixed, and the rest of the season just as much, if not even more so. Despite weak reviews and weaker ratings, HBO announced a second season. But after a regime change, the decision was quickly reversed, and now the show is officially canceled. In my review of Vinyl for Channel+Crossing, I compared it to previous canceled HBO shows. This turned out to be prescient. Ultimately, Vinyl failed because its plot and characters were anemic and its connection to the 70s time period and music were feeble, which is a problem when your show is about music. The Get Down doesn't have this problem, which isn't to say that it doesn't have problems of its own. The story is a Greek myth-style hero's journey starting in 1977 in the South Bronx. Ezekiel is a high schooler with a talent for poetry who wants to win the heart of his friend and muse, Mylene. In so trying, he sets off on a momentous adventure which leads him to an infamous graffiti artist, Grandmaster Flash, and the birth of hip-hop. I'm not going to give away any more plot details, partly so you can experience it for yourself, but mainly because the story is very convoluted. The Get Down doesn't feel like previous Netflix fare primed for binge watching. This time, they are breaking with tradition slightly by splitting the season in half. 6 episodes now, with 6 more to come in 2017. Baz Luhrmann's direction is as strong and consistent as it always is, for better or worse, and he seems most comfortable working within the normal time constraints of a feature film. As a result, I felt like I was watching a theatrical motion picture instead of a 93-minute television pilot with 5 60-minute follow-up episodes. Theatricality, which of course is one of Baz Luhrmann's staples, is the driving force behind The Get Down and its music. But it can also be its great weakness, especially when the direction or script isn't as good as it should be. The glossy spotlight shines brightly on every scene. Because of this, every flaw and blemish in the series is highlighted. Luckily, the performances from the actors are very strong, especially from the young leads. Justice Smith, Shameik Moore, and the rest fully inhabit their characters with an earnest decisiveness and emotional intensity. The cast is one of the best things about the series and elevates it most when they are not being hampered by an incoherent script and insufferable dialogue. Giancarlo Esposito and Jimmy Smits are seasoned actors in a show populated primarily by newcomers and add an air of experience. But they find themselves locked in a struggle with cliché plots and poorly developed characterizations. Some of Jimmy Smits' scenes especially are laughably ridiculous and seem like something out of a bad novella. Putting that aside, the true star of the show and ultimate reason to watch is the music. It is without a doubt that a lot of care and work went into putting together the soundtrack, rather than simply curating a few songs from the period. Whether it's original music or classic originals, everything is placed prominently and perfectly, at least from a technical standpoint. It also has some of the best sound design of a television series that I've heard in recent memory. The Get Down is a fantasy cartoon that borrows elements from films like The Warriors and other visual cues from that period. It's also, at times, a YA novella with a dizzying script that has stratospheric ambitions. It teases as a nostalgic trip through the birth of hip-hop and is only very loosely based in reality. Which is all fine, except I can't rid myself of the thought that someone like Spike Lee would be better suited to handle the story and period. It has exciting and well-choreographed musical numbers, but it suffers from an identity crisis further compounded by erratic shifts in tone and pace. But where vinyl was lacking most, The Get Down has heart and a connection to the music. Between that and Baz Luhrmann's maximalism, the next 6 episodes promise to be a musical fireworks display. If you like the show, click thumbs up and subscribe. If you'd like to know more about any of the television programs reviewed, or where you can watch them, or simply have a thought you'd like to share, leave a comment below. You can also visit us at facebook.com/channelcrossing and our website channelcrossingusuk.wordpress.com, which also features written reviews and other tidbits. You can also email me at channelcrossingusuk@gmail.com. This week's mixed pick comes from Michael Palin by way of BBC One and the iPlayer. Palin visits the Dogon people on the way to Timbuktu.
The dog, the antelope.
Does he shoot them or does he...
Yeah, this is something what he had to kill monkeys.
Monkey that's seen better days.
Yes. On top better.
Right.
This is a monkey's head.
Yes, absolutely. Can you show me?
Okay. What tower? Never walking down that.
Right. We go again. Yeah, that's okay. That just
It's
got
okay?
blast right across my face.
Oh, it's okay.
That's okay. I know how you feel now.